Hello and welcome to Unbreakable Ventures. I'm Ollie Law, Editor-in-Chief, and you join me today as I walk you through one of our deep dives. Today's podcast is a topic that has been on my mind since late October. I joined a panel discussion that started as a diplomatic event but revealed some uncomfortable truths about where New Zealand really stands when it comes to disaster preparedness. Let me set the scene for you. October 30th, the Asia New Zealand Foundation and the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs hosted a panel discussion titled Building Resilience, Taiwan's Disaster Management. Now, you might be thinking, where does Taiwan fit into all this? Well, as I dug deeper into my research in preparing for the panel, I saw that they may be New Zealand's greatest case study. Taiwan sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, just like we do. They face typhoons, earthquakes, tsunamis, the full disaster cocktail. Between 700 and 2,000 perceptible earthquakes hit Taiwan every single year. But here's the thing, they've built one of the most sophisticated disaster response systems in the world. Not because they're bigger than us, not because they're wealthier, but because in 1999, they experienced a catastrophic failure, and they learned from it and did something about it. At Unbreakable Ventures, our mission is to provide useful insights and knowledge about how to prepare and manage the threat landscape. We're a bootstrapped, community-led publication that pulls in the very best subject matter experts to provide their analysis on evolving and current threats, as well as deep dives. Like this, we do a fortnightly risk update that goes through the current threats you need to know about and what to do to mitigate them. So if you're not already, please consider subscribing. It helps us immensely, and the more that subscribe, the better our reach and our experts. If you find after a few weeks it's not your thing, totally fine. You can always unsubscribe. But with that out of the way, let's go back to October 30th. The panel was led by Joanne Oh. She's Taiwan's representative to New Zealand, essentially their ambassador. But before arriving in Wellington in January 2023, she was Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson for 4 years. She's Columbia University educated, UN task force veteran, sharp, direct, and refreshingly honest about what works and what doesn't. Alongside her was Ollie Law, head of emergency management for Selwyn District Council. I've known Al for a few years now, and we're both passionate and involved with the professionalisation of emergency management in New Zealand. More on that later. Max Mitchell, an international parliamentary scholar, did an excellent job moderating, and I was invited there as a panellist representing a private sector perspective with a lens on how I've experienced bureaucratic bottlenecks that have slowed innovation. The discussion was fascinating. But what struck me most wasn't what we said on stage, it was during my comprehensive research as I prepared for the talk. The immense gap between what Taiwan has built and where New Zealand is today. So in this podcast, I want to talk to you through this gap. Not to criticise for the sake of it, but because we're running out of time to fix this. I base my approach to national level resilience on 3 critical elements. I call it the CTC framework. Communication, technology, community. When all 3 work together, disaster responses can excel. But when one fails, they all fail. Taiwan seems to get this. They've integrated these 3 elements into a system that's been refined over 25 years. But New Zealand? Well, we're still talking about building the foundation. Today, we're going to explore Taiwan's model. We'll look at what New Zealand is doing, and more importantly, what we're not doing. We'll talk about the procurement trap that's keeping us stuck, and we'll discuss what happens when public starts losing trust in the systems that are supposed to protect them. Because here's the reality. The next Alpine fault rupture isn't an if question, it's a when question. The next major tsunami, the next cyclone Gabrielle, these aren't hypotheticals. They are coming. And when they hit, we need systems that actually work, not systems we're still planning to build. Not systems stuck in procurement review, not systems that fail during a test run. So let's start with Taiwan. Let's look at what happens when a country decides to actually solve this problem. September 21st, 1999, 1:47 a.m. A magnitude 7.3 earthquake strikes central Taiwan. The Shichi earthquake, 2,400 people are killed, 10,000 are injured, and 100,000 buildings collapse. But the deaths weren't just from collapsed buildings. The disaster response itself was chaotic. No standardized incident command system, no disaster medical teams, no common operating picture. Local governments couldn't communicate with central government. Rescue teams didn't know where to go, and medical supplies couldn't reach the injured. Taiwan's government looked at that catastrophe and made a decision. This will never happen again. Not never again will it have earthquakes, that's impossible, but never again will our response be this chaotic. Within months, they began building what would become the National Science and Technology Centre for Disaster Reduction, known as the NCDR. Today, 25 years later, NCDR is the backbone of Taiwan's entire disaster response ecosystem. And here's what makes it different from anything we have in New Zealand. The NCDR system architecture encourages entrepreneurship and innovation. NCDR isn't just a database, it's not just a website, it's an integrated platform that connects sensors, science, government, and the public in real time. When I came across this solution, I started digging into its value. I was quite frankly in awe. Let me break down how it actually works. So first, the sensor network Taiwan has is over 700 seismic monitoring stations. They have weather radar covering every inch of the island, tide gauges, river level sensors, landslide detection systems. All of this data feeds into NCDR automatically. No manual uploads, no waiting for someone to put in numbers. The sensors feed the science in real time. Second, the science layer, NCDR takes that raw sensor data and runs it through predictive models. So earthquake impact modeling, typhoon trajectory prediction, flood risk assessment, landslide probability mapping, and here's the critical part, those models are pre-computed for different scenarios. So when a magnitude 6.5 earthquake hits off the east coast, NCDR already knows which communities will experience strong shaking. It already knows which roads are likely blocked. It already knows which hospitals are in the impact zone. It doesn't have to calculate this during the emergency. It's already been done. Third, the government's dashboard. So every emergency management agency in Taiwan has access to the same operating picture, national level, provincial level, city level. Everyone sees the same data at the same time. Rescue teams know where to deploy. Medical teams know which hospitals need support. Logistics teams know which supply routes are open. There's no phone tag here. No waiting for email updates. No conflicting information between agencies. All this information is in one place. And fourth, the public interface. Now, here's where Taiwan really separates itself from everyone else. They didn't build this incredible system and then lock it behind government firewalls. They made it public. NCDR data is available through multiple apps that regular people can download. The Taiwan Water Resources Agency app shows real-time river levels and flood warnings. The KNY Taiwan Earthquake app provides detailed shaking intensity maps within minutes of any earthquake. When Typhoon Gaimi hit in July 2024, millions of Taiwanese residents tracked its path, checked flood risks for their specific address, and received automated evacuation warnings, all through mobile apps connected to NCDR. Let me say that again. Millions of regular citizens had the same high-quality information that emergency managers had. April 3rd, 2024, 7:58 a.m., a magnitude 7.4 earthquake strikes near Hualien on Taiwan's east coast. Within 3 seconds, the earthquake early warning system detected the initial P waves. Within 10 seconds, warnings were broadcast across Taiwan. People in Taipei, 150 kilometers away, got warnings before the shaking reached them. That's the difference between standing in a doorway and being caught under falling objects. Within 5 minutes of the quake, NCDR's impact assessment was complete. Emergency managers knew 17 buildings collapsed or were severely damaged, multiple landslides blocking the Shuhua Highway, power outages affecting 87,000 households, which hospitals were operational and which weren't, where rescue teams needed to deploy first. Within 30 minutes, public-facing apps showed detailed shaking intensity maps. Citizens could check if their elderly parents in other cities were in high-impact zones. They could see which roads were open for evacuation. They could find the nearest shelter. So what happened this time around? Despite a magnitude 7.4 earthquake in a populated area, they had 9 deaths and about 1,000 injuries. Compare that to 1999's Shishi earthquake of a similar magnitude, 2,400 deaths. The difference isn't geology. It's not the buildings, though Taiwan has improved building codes significantly, and so too has New Zealand. The difference, though, this time is the system. But here's what makes Taiwan's approach truly effective. They don't just build the technology and hope people use it. They do mandatory drills, twice a year in fact. Taiwan conducts these nationwide disaster drills. Not optional, not suggestions, mandatory. Schools practice earthquake responses. Businesses practice evacuations. Communities practice setting up emergency shelters. And they don't just practice the easy stuff. They practice for the chaos. During Typhoon Gaimi in July 2024, the NCDR's flood prediction models showed that certain districts in Taipei would experience severe flooding. The drills they'd conducted meant that residents knew which floors to evacuate to, building managers knew how to activate flood barriers, emergency services knew which underground parking areas to monitor. The system works because the community knows how to use the system. Communication, technology, community. All three working together in sweet harmony. But as I kept researching, I realized Taiwan had a culture of continuous improvement. They don't rest on their laurels. After every major event, NCDR publishes detailed after-action reports, or as some know it, post-incident reports. What worked, what didn't, what needs to change. And they actually implemented those changes. When the April 2024 Hualien earthquake revealed gaps in mountain community communication, they didn't just write a report and file it away. They deployed additional satellite communication systems within months. This is a system that has been refined over 25 years and it's still improving. Amazing, really. So now let's talk about New Zealand. Where are we in this journey? Well, let's start with what we know for certain. New Zealand sits on the boundary of the Pacific and Australian tectonic plates. We have the Alpine Fault running 600 kilometres down the South Island. We have the Hukarangi subduction zone off the North Island's east coast. We know these will rupture, not if, when. The Alpine Fault has a 75% probability of rupturing in the next 50 years. When it goes, and it's called the big one for a reason, it could be magnitude 8 or higher. AF8, the scenario name, would affect an area from Milford Sound to Christchurch. It would cut the South Island in two. It would isolate communities for weeks, potentially months. It would trigger landslides, dam failures, and potentially tsunamis. We know this. GNS science has modelled it extensively. Emergency management agencies have planned for it. But here's the uncomfortable question. Do we have the systems in place to respond to it effectively? Well, after nearly 2 years of speaking with the most senior members of the 4 main emergency services agencies, I'm not convinced we do. Let me explain why I think this is. If we want to talk about vulnerabilities and gaps, you can't have this conversation without first mentioning New Zealand's common operating picture, or more accurately, the lack of one. Taiwan built NCDR over 25 years. New Zealand is still trying to agree on what a common operating picture should look like. Now, to be fair, there has been progress. In 2016, I worked on early COP concepts with emergency management agencies. The government and relevant parties have created many reports on how we get to a suitable COP system. The vision has always been clear. Create a shared platform where all agencies could see the same information during emergencies. But here we are, nearly a decade later, and we're still building the foundation. Actually, from my research, we're 35 years into this journey at this point. NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency, has been pushing for a national COP for a while. They've been handed this mammoth job because of their national responsibility. And no offense to NEMA, I don't think it's working. I don't think they're the right agency for the job. They've issued requests for information, RFIs. They've held workshops. They've drafted blueprints. They've paid consultants vast sums to build a strategy on how we build a COP. But we don't have a functioning national system. What we have instead is fragmentation. Different regions use different systems. Some use commercial platforms out of Europe or America. Some use spreadsheets. Some still rely on whiteboards and phone calls. Actually, I still think crisis room whiteboards are better than any tech. During Cyclone Gabrielle in February 2023, though, coordination between agencies was challenging precisely because we didn't have a common operating picture. Fire and emergency had their systems. Civil defence had theirs. District health boards had theirs, and NZDF had theirs as well. I know from talking with the team in Hastings that they were bombarded with calls from the government, just more distractions while they're trying to support the public. Getting everyone on the same page required constant communication, manual updates, and a lot of phone calls. It's pretty exhausting. Compare that to Taiwan, where the moment Typhoon Gaimi trajectory updated, every agency saw the update simultaneously. But it's not just about having a platform. Software is great, but it's meaningless if cultural resilience isn't there. It's about what feeds into that platform itself. New Zealand has excellent sensors. GeoNet operates a world-class seismic monitoring network. NIWA has sophisticated weather modelling. Regional councils monitor river levels and rainfall. And LINS has an incredible wealth of data my team have been playing with and adapting to our own systems. But these systems and softwares don't automatically feed into a unified emergency management platform. And then there's the public-facing component. And to me, this is smouldering crisis we're currently experiencing in New Zealand. Taiwan has multiple apps that connect citizens to real-time disaster data. What does New Zealand have? Well, we have the Emergency Mobile Alert System, known as EMA. It's a basic cell broadcast system that can push text messages to phones in specific areas. Look, it's better than nothing, but it's also incredibly limited. You can't use it for nuanced, real-time information updates. You can't show maps. You can't provide interactive guidance. You can't let people check the status of their specific neighbourhood. It's a one-way broadcast system in an age where people expect interactive, real-time information. And when those basic systems fail, well, the public loses trust. Let me give you two examples that perfectly illustrate this problem. April 6, 2025. Christchurch was supposed to test its tsunami sirens, a regular thing we do. These sirens had been installed after years of planning and community consultation. The test was scheduled, it was publicised, and people were ready for it on the Sunday morning. And then nothing. The sirens didn't sound. Why? Well, because the person responsible for activating the test was dealing with a car crash outside their front door. Now, I don't want to be harsh on that individual. Emergencies happen, priorities shift. But here's the systematic problem that reveals. We build a critical emergency system with a single point of failure. One person, one responsibility, no backup, no automation. This same system failed in 2016 too, when the coastal community of Kaikoura experienced a devastating earthquake. Their tsunami system failed to alarm as well, despite the presence of small tsunamis hitting the shore. If we can't reliably test the system under controlled conditions, how are we supposed to trust it during an actual tsunami? Let's jump to July 30th, 2025. A magnitude 7.2 earthquake strikes off Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia. It's powerful enough to trigger tsunami warnings across the Pacific. But to me, this event provided a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see how multiple nations respond to the same event simultaneously. We got an unforgiving look at the level of community resilience across the Pacific. Japan issues warnings within minutes and literally millions of people immediately leave the coast. Hawaii issues warnings and provides clear evacuation guidance 24/7 over a single live newsfeed. New Zealand, we send an information-only alert at 6 a.m, wake up the nation and lose trust. Let me be clear about what information only means. It means we're telling you this is happening, but we're not telling you to do anything about it yet. It's a CYA message, cover your ass. We're technically informing the public, so we can't be accused of not communicating. But we're not providing actionable guidance, so we can't be accused of causing unnecessary panic. In fairness to the civil defence, damned if you do, damned if you don't. The problem with this approach, that's not how you build public trust. People woke up to an alert that essentially said, there might be a tsunami threat, we're looking into it, don't worry about it, but also we thought you should know. But don't do anything because we're monitoring it. They just shared the same update from the night before. In fact, my wife and I panicked. We immediately said, okay, we're on here, you know the drill. No, just a repeat of the information we already know. So compare that to how Hawaii handled the same event. They had clear risk assessment, specific guidance, regular updates. They kept critical tools isolated until they were truly needed. And compare both of those to how Taiwan handled the situation as well, completely different again. NCDR would have run tsunami modelings instantly. Every coastal community would have had their specific risk level shared with them. Apps would have shown which areas needed to evacuate and which were safe. Emergency management would have had pre-positioned resources ready to deploy. The difference isn't technology alone. It's the integration of communication, technology, and community preparedness. When you really dive in where Taiwan is on a national scale, it concerns me where other nations might be. Now I want to talk about something I'm personally invested in. COP-NZ, the Common Operating Platform, New Zealand. Full transparency, I'm one of the co-founders and head of technology for this project. But that's precisely why I can speak to both the opportunity and the challenges here in New Zealand. COP-NZ is New Zealand's first attempt to build a true national common operating platform for emergency services, not just emergency management, but police, fire, ambulance, and other frontline responders. We've taken it upon ourselves to get this thing done. We have the expertise and we have the tools, we just need the funds. The vision is to create what Taiwan has had for 2 decades, a shared operating picture where every agency sees the same information in real time. We're building this with modern architecture, cloud native, API first, designed for integration. It should have the highest level of geospatial and artificial intelligence sewed right into its infrastructure. But I also believe a truly valuable COP is one that is accessible to the public and the media. Imagine it, the news can help spread the correct information by getting it straight from the source. The goal is to eliminate the fragmentation problem. So when the next major event happens, responders aren't cobbling together information from 5 different systems. They have one platform, one source of truth. Today, in some regions of New Zealand, fire and emergency send their situational reports for local councils via a Word document. When things change, they use tracked changes as the feature to provide those updates. I'm not joking. The reality is New Zealand has an innovation trap. We consistently rank well on global innovation indexes. We're creative, we're resourceful, we punch above our weight. But when it comes to the Global Innovation Index, that showed us we're excellent at thinking and those innovative ideas, but we're terrible at implementing them. And that's where we get stuck in a cycle of research, consultation, and review. And by the time we're ready to act, the opportunity is past or the problem has evolved. This is nowhere more evident than in government procurement for technology systems. Let me provide you a recent example of what I mean. The issue came into sharp focus at the Ministry for Ethnic Communities Symposium, which I was invited to report on recently. The theme was resilience, investment, and economic stability. Going for growth, they called it. Finance Minister Nicola Willis spoke about the government's commitment to innovation and removing barriers for businesses. And the recurring message was, we want to hear from you. We want your solutions. We want to innovate. But here's what also came out of that event. The government wants to hear from us about solutions, but agencies are still putting up roadblocks. Procurement processes that aren't systemized across the board are slowing us down. Each agency with its own requirements, its own approval chains, its own timeline is the reality here in New Zealand. One thing that struck me from the symposium was that foreign investors need confidence in a nation's resilience before they will invest here. And I'm not talking about people being resilient. Kiwis are incredibly resilient. I'm talking about economic stability when a major disaster occurs. When a foreign investor is deciding between New Zealand and, say, Taiwan, they're looking at what happens when the big one hits. Does your economy grind to a halt? Or do you have systems that keep critical infrastructure running, that coordinate responses effectively, that, say, minimize downtime? By the way, that might be why, despite mounting geopolitical pressure, Taiwan is home to TSMC, the largest manufacturer of semiconductors in the world. It's probably a whole other podcast in itself, to be honest. When it comes to getting investment, Taiwan can point to NCDR and say, we've handled magnitude 7 earthquakes and we keep functioning. What can New Zealand point to? We can talk about our plans, we can talk about our research, we can talk about what we're going to build and how we responded in the past. How NEMA can even show them the huge 10-year roadmap Deloitte helped them build last month. But we can't point to a functioning, proven national system. No one can. And that's probably why the public are losing trust. Every year, we delay building integrated disaster response systems. We accumulate risk, not just the risk of lives lost in the next major event, but the economic risk, the investment risk, the credibility risk. When Cyclone Gabrielle hit in 2023, the economic impact was estimated at $13.5 billion. How much of that could have been reduced with better coordination, with better predictive modeling, or with better real-time information sharing? We'll never know. But Taiwan's track record suggests the answer is a lot. The way to fix this is to fix the systemization problem, procurement process that need to be systemized across government. If an innovation works for one agency, there should be at least a track or a pathway for multiple to adopt it. I can sell COP system to NEMA tomorrow. Honestly, I have it ready to go. But that doesn't fix the problem if there is no mandate for the country's 78 councils to adopt it. If a technology meets security and functionality requirements for NEMA, it shouldn't have to go through a completely different evaluation process for FENS, for police, for civil defence. Right now, we're treating every agency as an island. They each reinvent the wheel. They each navigate their own procurement journey. They each build their own business case. Don't believe me? Well, go and ask around at FENS about their new COP system they've just released. They're in the process of rolling this out nationwide, but this is another common operating picture that is painted for one audience only. Meanwhile, Taiwan built NCDR once. They made it available to everyone. Even today, entrepreneurs continue to build tools directly supporting disaster recovery in their spare time at their own expense, thanks to NCDR. As we approach the next election cycle, I'm genuinely worried. Politicians will make promises about resilience and emergency preparedness. They'll promise investment in disaster response systems. They'll promise better coordination. I know I have a direct line through to Minister Mark Mitchell, who, by the way, I rate quite highly as a minister, but he will still tell me what I want to hear. And then what? More consultation, more reviews, more procurement processes. We need to break this cycle. We need to move from talking about innovation to implementing innovation. But how? Well, let's talk about building codes and infrastructure standards. Because when people talk about disaster resilience, they often focus on the physical infrastructure first. Earthquake-proof buildings is what we're saying here. Tsunami barriers, flood defenses. And yes, that matters enormously. Taiwan has significantly upgraded standards since 1999. New Zealand has done the same after Christchurch 2011. But here's the thing. Infrastructure alone doesn't save lives. You can have the strongest building codes in the world, but if your emergency response is chaotic, if your communication systems fail, if the public doesn't know what to do, people may still die. Taiwan doesn't treat building codes and emergency response as separate problems. They're part of the same system. NCDR's models incorporate building code data, When an earthquake hits, the system knows which buildings were constructed before 2000 code updates. It knows which areas have older infrastructure. It can prioritize inspections and rescue efforts accordingly. The building codes and the digital response systems reinforce each other. In New Zealand, we've upgraded building standards substantially. Post-Christchurch earthquake, we've strengthened requirements for earthquake resistance. We've improved tsunami evacuation planning in coastal areas. Just YouTube what's being done to make the new stadium essentially earthquake-proof. But we haven't connected those physical improvements to digital response systems. When the next major earthquake hits Wellington, will emergency managers have instant access to which buildings in the affected area meet current codes? Which buildings are likely compromised? Which ones need inspections first? Where are the vulnerable populations housed? That information exists, but it's not integrated into a common operating picture, a single point of truth where anyone can freely access that information. This is actually an opportunity. We don't have to build NCDR from scratch the way Taiwan did 25 years ago. We can learn from their model. We can use modern cloud architecture. We can integrate data sources that already exist. GeoNet has excellent seismic data. Councils have building information. LINS has geographic data. Statistics NZ has population data. The pieces exist. We just need to connect them. But that requires the political will to fund it through procurement processes that allow its agencies to be willing to share that data, that commitment to actually finish what we start. And let me be blunt, we're running out of time to get this done. The Alpine fault could rupture tomorrow, or next year, or in 20 years, but it will rupture. And when it does, we'll be judged not on our intentions, but on our systems. So what do we actually need to do today? First, we need to genuinely commit to building a national common operating picture, not another consultation process, not another review, not another blueprint that sits on a shelf until the next election. A functioning system that integrates existing data sources automatically, provides a shared view across all emergency management agencies, has public-facing components so citizens can access relevant information, is built with modern, scalable architecture. Oh, and most importantly, it has a good user interface so all generations can easily navigate it. NEMA's been pushing for this. COP-NZ is working on a system for utilities and lifelines, but we need political backing and funding that matches the urgency of the risk. If funding doesn't come from government, fine, but we're 82nd for foreign investment according to that same Global Innovation Index. Second, we need to fix the procurement trap, create a fast-track pathway for proven innovations. If technology works for one agency, fine, create a mechanism for other agencies to adopt it without starting from scratch. Require agencies to use common standards and systems so fire and emergency, ambulance, police, and the civil defence can actually share data seamlessly. And hold agencies accountable for delays that increase that risk. Third, we need to embrace open data. Taiwan makes NCDR data available to developers and the public anywhere in the world. That's created an ecosystem of apps and tools that enhance public preparedness. New Zealand has excellent data sources, as I've said, GeoNet, NIWA, LINS, Stats NZ. This makes it a problem because we need to make it accessible through those modern APIs. Let developers build tools that help communities prepare. Let researchers analyze patterns and improve predictions. Data siloing helps no one. Open data saves lives. Fourth, we need to learn from Taiwan's approach to drills, not token exercises where people walk away calmly to assembly points, but realistic mandatory drills that prepare people for actual chaos. Practice evacuations when systems fail, practice setting up emergency shelters, practice operating without power or internet. I know that's a big ask for a nation that started removing emergency notifications from their phones after a 6 a.m. wake up. But we should be looking at schools and the education sector. What are they doing every year? Can we get them to drill twice a year as a minimum? Businesses should incorporate it into their continuity planning. Communities should know their roles, because when the big one hits, muscle memory matters. Fifth, We need to rebuild public trust in emergency alert systems. The Christchurch siren failure was embarrassing, and the Russia earthquake information-only message at 6 a.m. was worse. 5 minutes on Reddit showed a brutally honest view of where the public's approval of emergency services is currently sitting. We need to eliminate single points of failure in critical systems, provide clear, actionable guidance during events, and test systems regularly and publicly. Communicate transparently through the things when they go wrong as well is very important. Trust is earned through reliability. Right now, we're not reliable. 6, we need to actively learn from allies we've solved these problems with. Taiwan has 25 years of experience with NCDR. Japan has refined earthquake early warning systems since 2007. Australia's Victoria has run a state-level COP since 2016. Hawaii has shown us how to communicate tsunami risks very clearly. These aren't secrets. These countries are willing to share what they've learned. We just need to be humble enough to ask and disciplined enough to implement. I know that folks like Ollie Law, who I mentioned at the start, is actively campaigning to get these guys over to New Zealand, to get them to share experiences while we share ours. Remember the framework I mentioned at the start: communication, technology, community. Everything I've just outlined feeds into these 3 pillars. Communication, we can nail this with a national COP for agency coordination, open data for public access, clear, actionable emergency alerts, transparent testing and reporting. Technology, we need integrated sensor networks, automated data feeds, pre-computed impact models, modern scalable platforms, public-facing apps, and for the community, we should be doing mandatory realistic drills, public access to preparedness information, trust built through reliability, self-sufficiency training. Get all 3 working together and you have a true national level of resilience. Neglect any of them though, and the system fails. All right, let me paint you a picture of what success looks like with all of that in mind. It's 2030, a magnitude 7.8 earthquake strikes the Alpine Fault. Within seconds, automated sensors detect the quake. Within 10 seconds, warnings reach communities that will experience strong shaking. Within 5 minutes, the national COP shows which communities are affected, which roads are likely blocked, which hospitals are operational, where rescue resources need to deploy. Every emergency agency sees the same picture. Police, fire, health, civil defence, NDF all coordinate from the start. The public receives clear, localised information through mobile apps. It says something like, your area, strong shaking expected, shelter in place, avoid State Highway 6, emergency shelter at Westland High School. This same information is accessible to families overseas. After all, places like Queenstown, who will be heavily impacted by AF8, are full of tourists. We're not talking generic warnings here. This is specific, actionable, relevant information. Communities that have practice drills twice a year know exactly what to do. They don't panic, they execute. They're getting things done, and the emergency services know it. Resources are pre-positioned based on predictive models. Medical teams, search and rescue, engineering assessment crews. The response isn't perfect. No response to a magnitude 7.8 earthquake could be. But it's coordinated. It's informed. It's effective. The rest of the world tune in and once again are impressed by New Zealand doing the right thing. Lives are saved because the system worked. That's what Taiwan has built. That's what New Zealand needs to build now. Do we keep researching, consulting, reviewing, and planning? Or do we actually build the systems we know we need? Do we keep treating each agency as an island? Or do we create genuine integration and coordination? Do we keep making political promises that lead nowhere? Or do we commit to implementation with the same urgency we'd have if the Alpine Fault ruptured tomorrow? We could be doing 90-day procurement sprints. We could be renting out IP off other nations. We could be incentivizing startups to build technology that could revolutionize response. At the Ethnic Exchange Symposium a few weeks ago, I heard government leaders say they want to hear from us. They want our solutions. They want innovation. Okay, here's my solution, Minister Mark Mitchell. Stop asking what we want to build and start asking what's preventing us from building it. The technology exists. The expertise exists. The data sources exist. What's missing is streamlined procurement, the political will to fund implementation, agency willingness to integrate, a commitment to finish what we start. Taiwan proves it's possible. Taiwan had 2,400 reasons to build NCDR after 1999. 2,400 lives lost because their disaster response was chaotic. They spent 25 years building, refining and improving that system. And now when a magnitude 7.4 earthquake strikes, only 9 people are killed, not thousands. That's not luck, that's system design. New Zealand has the stable government Taiwan has. We have low corruption, strong institutions, quality education. We have the talent to build these systems. We just need to stop talking and start doing. AFA isn't waiting for us to finish our reviews. The Hikurangi subduction zone isn't waiting for procurement processes. The next major tsunami isn't waiting for political consensus. These events will happen whether we're ready or not. The only question is, when they do happen, will we have a system in place that works? Or will we be looking at the chaos, counting the preventable deaths and asking ourselves, why didn't we act when we had the chance? I want to leave you with this phrase that encapsulates Taiwan's approach. Sensors feed science, science feeds public, society drills the behaviour. It's elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its contrast to where New Zealand is today. We have the sensors, we have the science, we have a public that wants to be prepared. What we're missing is the integration, the commitment, the agency, and the urgency. My final thoughts are this. How many more reviews do we need? How many more disasters? How many more years of talking before we actually build the systems we know we need? Taiwan answered those questions in 1999. New Zealand is still asking them in 2025. In an era of unprecedented technological growth, this isn't good enough. In a time where the threat landscape feels like a nuclear bomb falling from the sky, we must act fast and with purpose. We can do better. We must do better. And we're running out of time to prove it. That's it for today's deep dive. I want to thank the Asia New Zealand Foundation and the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs for inviting me to talk at their recent event. Without that opportunity, it may have taken me years to study the fascinating story of Taiwan's NCDR. If you leave with anything today, make sure it's the political will to help spread this message. Don't sleep on this. Today is the time to act. And if you found this resource useful, consider subscribing to Unbreakable Ventures or sharing this podcast with your network. After all, resilience is about community and communication. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, stay safe.